The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
My baby dolls, how are you? No baseball this week. Houston Astros, of course, beat the Los Angeles Dodgers last week, and now the weather in New England has turned cold. Welcome to another episode of Genesis, and we play baseball, we talk baseball, we drink and breathe baseball, even though it's not the baseball season. And as always, I am your host, Ian Kahanowitz. And returning to the show is a book and an author I love, and, you know, Jerald Podair. Great book, City of Dreams, Dodger Stadium, and the Birth of Modern Los Angeles. Holidays are coming up. This is the third installment of the book, and we're going slow because I never knew as much history and what went into the building, creating of Dodger Stadium. You look in the history books, you're like, well, yeah, you know, they started playing in 1958 at the Coliseum, and by 1962, you know, Dodger Stadium was put up, and it was 100% privately financed, but you don't get the whole story, what goes in between, and that's what we're doing today with Jerald, and, you know, I love having him on my show. Of course, you are listening to the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Hey, we got a lot of shows on the air, and I always mention them, and you could just go to the network, and, we got Alan Blumpkin and Finoli on Pittsburgh now. We got Peter Golenbach continues, you know, Golenbach University. We got Hal Bach, and he does vintage sports. I mean, we got Mark in the midday with Mark Littell. We got the Oakland A's with Nancy Finley. I love being on this network because it runs in line in what I do is to teach. And Professor Podair has created a book, which a fantastic book on Dodger Stadium. You know, I can't help but tout this book. And, you know, Jerry is a professor of history, and the Robert S. French Professor of American Studies at Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. And, of course, there's Green Bay Packer land. But, hey, you know, I'm in Boston, he's in Wisconsin, and that's just the way it goes. But, hey, we're here today. We're on the line. Welcome to the show, Jerry.
Always good to talk to you, Ian, and always good to be back from a rather cold Wisconsin, but that's the way it is this time of year out here.
Yeah, but, you know, I hear Appleton is so beautiful, and, you know, that
very
part
nice
of Wisconsin.
place. Yeah.
You know, that part of Wisconsin, I mean, it's like God's country, what people tell me about it. And,
yeah, it's
you know, I got to get out.
Nice. Yeah, you really should. Yeah, I mean, don't come out during the winter, but come out from May to September, and just, you know, 75-degree sunny days virtually every day. It's really, really beautiful. Wisconsinites love the outdoors because they spent a lot of time indoors during the winter. So spring and summer in Wisconsin, especially this part of Wisconsin, is really wonderful.
And, you know, I got another author, and I don't know if you read this author's book, J.D. Thorne's The Ten Commandments of Baseball. And he takes Joe McCarthy's, he's Ten Commandments of Baseball, and he relates it to certain instances. Yeah.
Is that John Thorne? You mean like the Baseball Hall of Fame historian?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So he's going to be on my show at the end of the month, and you know, he got the book, and you know, he's going to be on my show, and you know, he said you got to come out to Milwaukee and see Wisconsin. I said I haven't been past Pittsburgh on my west.
Oh.
You know,
well, you should definitely come out to Wisconsin. As I said, over the summer, you should go to Milwaukee and see a Brewer game. That's always a lot of fun. You know, great stadium, great fans, really festive atmosphere. One of the things I notice about Wisconsin and Milwaukee Brewer baseball especially is the pleasantness of the fans. You don't really get any, you know, hard-edged, angry, sometimes violent fans out here. They root for the Brewers, but I've sat in the stands for many years with with Met hats on when the Mets come out and play them. Never had any trouble at all. In fact, one memorable afternoon, a Brewer fan came up to me after a game that the Mets had won and congratulated me, which would not have happened on the East Coast.
See, I love it. I got to get out there. And I heard minor league ball out there is just great.
Oh,
And
fantastic! We have a minor league, an A-ball Brewer affiliate here in Appleton, Wisconsin Timber Rattlers, and it's one of the best minor league franchises in baseball. Great crowds, a lot of fun, and it's minor league baseball is always a great way to introduce children to baseball because it's on a smaller scale, it's more leisurely, and you can see a lot of baseball fans, young baseball fans, being made in Appleton when they go to Timber Rattlers games because they obviously then graduate to the Brewers. But minor league baseball for a kid is a great place to start.
And I live 10 minutes away from
from Pawtucket or
Pawtucket.
Yeah,
Pawtucket.
Legendary McCoy Stadium. It's probably just about the oldest minor league stadium now.
It is, and some for a $10 admission and a $1 hamburger. I couldn't care less. Kids love it. Now, when I go home to Brooklyn, I got to go to a Cyclones game, and the ladies of the All-American girls who I met earlier this year up in Fenway have invited me next year when they have their parade in Brooklyn, my native Brooklyn. I'm going to go home and take the kids to the Brooklyn Cyclones and see a game there.
That would be fantastic. I'm a native New Yorker. I have to say I haven't ever been to the Cyclones on my visits to the city, but that's on my list.
Yeah, man, we're about baseball, and right now, last we spoke, and just to remind the listeners, Proposition B gets voted on. They pass. O'Malley's rejoicing. And it's only 2 days.
And then just a few scant weeks later, the judge speaks in Los Angeles Superior Court. Judge Arnold Prager rules that the Dodger contract is illegal because he writes that it is public aid to a private entrepreneur, and that the Dodger Stadium, which is going to be privately owned, does not fulfill a public purpose. And if it doesn't fulfill a public purpose, the grant or even sale of land at an advantageous price to the Dodgers is illegal. So he strikes the contract down, and in July 1958, O'Malley is pretty much back to square one because without that contract, he has no stadium. So that is a tremendous shock to him after the triumph of Proposition B. So as of July 1958, he is really stuck because he doesn't have a contract. Now, of course, the judge basically says, well, if you want to build a stadium on your own land, you certainly can do that. But the city of Los Angeles should not be giving you help with city-owned land, giving you that land or even trading you that land. So that's where he is in July 1958.
Now, let me ask you something here. You got the Rubin and Kirschbaum cases.
Right.
Consolidated.
Right.
What was that about?
Those are two taxpayer lawsuits that challenge the Dodger contract, and that's what Prager is ruling on. Rubin, who is a lawyer himself, and he's representing himself as a taxpayer, and Kirschbaum, who is represented by a infamously notorious lawyer in Los Angeles named Phil Silver. That's P-H-I-L-L, 2 L's, not to be confused with the Sergeant Bilko, Phil Silvers. This is another man. They feel that the Chavez Ravine land was a gift of public property to a private entrepreneur, Walter O'Malley, and so they sue almost immediately when the Dodgers arrive in late '57, and it doesn't get tried before Judge Arnold Prager in L.A. Superior Court until July 1958. There's a trial before the judge, and then a week or two later, the judge renders his decision, and that's where O'Malley is stuck in July 1958. He's won the referendum, but he still doesn't have a stadium contract.
And while they were waiting for the answer, he still pushed ahead, O'Malley. He kept going for his plans for the stadium before the ruling.
Right. He's a very optimistic man. A lot more conservative men and conservative owners, especially when it's their money, and this is O'Malley's money, would have pulled back. But he has this idea that eventually, somehow, some way, this stadium is going to get built, and so he keeps planning the stadium, even though obviously they're appealing this trial court ruling, but as he does so, he's still making plans. In Brooklyn, O'Malley is really hamstrung. He's hamstrung by the stadium. He's hamstrung by finances, and he's even hamstrung by the inertia of baseball, I would say. In the 1950s in baseball, before this move, baseball is a very conservative sport. It markets itself conservatively. It sells itself conservatively. It views itself conservatively. It views itself as the number one sport in America, which it is, a sport that really doesn't have to change. But once O'Malley gets out to Los Angeles, it's almost like he's born again or born anew. And there are all sorts of new possibilities he sees for marketing baseball at his new stadium, whenever he gets it built, as a form of entertainment. And today we view baseball as entertainment, which of course it is. But it was viewed a little differently by most owners in the 1950s. Most owners basically threw open the doors, did very little advertising, very few promotions, did very little for the fans except, say, come out and watch our local team, and relied on the passage of the game from father to son, that kind of bond to create their fan base. If you were, let's say, in Cincinnati, you own the Cincinnati Reds, you could rely on the fact that at some point a father would take a young son to a Cincinnati Red game, maybe when he was 5 or 6 years old, and he would become a fan, almost by osmosis. And then when he grew up, he would take his own son to a Cincinnati Red game, and he would become a fan. But O'Malley in Los Angeles understood that it wasn't going to be that simple there, because L.A. was a city of transients. There are people from all over the country there. And so he knows that when he gets his new stadium, he's going to have to market it in a different way. He's going to have to sell it in a different way. He's going to have to sell it as a form of entertainment, meaning he is going to have to give the fans some value even if the Dodgers lose. And that's how I would define the word entertainment. If you go to a game and expect to have a good time only if your team wins, for an owner, that's not a particularly good position to be in, because you're not going to win every time. So what O'Malley understands is, I've got a transient fan base here. This is not Cincinnati. This is a city filled with people from all over the country, and they're Dodger fans, but they haven't been in L.A. all that long. So if the Dodgers don't win, there's a possibility that they won't be fans. But if the Dodgers don't win, O'Malley says, I'm going to give them something extra. I'm going to give them a really nice stadium. I'm going to give them low ticket prices. I'm going to give them Dodger dogs, the famous Dodger hot dog, which I think is still the most famous and iconic in baseball. I'm going to give them mountain views and skyline views. I'm going to give them a stadium with no poles. I'm going to give them a stadium that's very, very convenient. I'm going to give them all sorts of promotions. I'm going to give them all sorts of things for the kids. I'm going to make it a family-oriented place. And with all of that, if the Dodgers lose, well, okay, the Dodgers lose, but my fans will have a good time. They will be entertained. And that, I think, is what O'Malley is planning, even in the face of this adverse court ruling. I mean, he still believes that somehow, some way, he's going to get the stadium built. And when he does, it's going to be a different kind of stadium. It's not just going to be a sports venue. It's going to be an entertainment venue. And if he can make it an entertainment venue and get not just hardcore fans, like Brooklyn Dodger fans, but both hardcore and casual fans who just want to be entertained, he is going to have a huge market. His market will not be, let's say, you take Brooklyn Dodger fans, really hardcore fans. That may be 10% of New York City's population. They're the ones who come out to Ebbets Field. Well, in Los Angeles, O'Malley wants 90% coverage. He wants the hardcore L.A. Dodger fans, but he also wants the casual fans, the families, sometimes with, trailing 4 or 5 kids in. Those are the kind of people he wants. He wants women. He wants minorities. He wants everyone, because everyone is going to help him make a lot of money in Los Angeles. So he may have had what I would say 10% coverage in New York with the Brooklyn Dodgers. He wants 90% coverage of the Los Angeles metropolitan area with the LA Dodgers. And the way to do that is to build Dodger Stadium.
And his great optimism, I think he was just blinded to this whole thing. Because let me read from your book here on the legal ruling, because you and I are both lawyers. And I want to just tell my listeners what O'Malley was up against. Now, the judge who ruled on July 14th, and not only that, 2 days earlier, I think the Giants got their green light to go build Candlestick Park, which really...
The Giants are proceeding on a completely different path, and in 58, it looks like the Giants, with their municipal stadium, are in a much better position than the Dodgers.
Now, I just want to read this, and then I want you to comment, because this is so important. Like you mentioned before, the judge saw no difference between purchasing land for a revenue-generating baseball team and acquiring property for the purpose of selling it for the use of a private bowling alley, a private golf course, a steel mill, a hotel, or any other private purpose. Yeah, that's fine, but this is the other stuff that the judge threw in. He also struck down the city's agreement to close the streets in Chavez Ravine and to spend $2 million on the road. And then he rejected the city's argument that the Ravine property was no longer needed by the people of Los Angeles and thus could be offered to the Dodgers. Now, there was only a handful of families. Chavez Ravine during the 1950s was pretty much vacant.
Well,
what's going on here?
What's going on? Now, first of all, since we're both lawyers, just looking at that decision and not knowing what comes afterwards, I think you'll agree with me. This is a killer decision. I mean, this is sweeping. This takes up virtually every argument that the Dodgers throw at him and rejects them. And if you had asked me, just looking at this ruling and not knowing what comes next in the story, what are the chances of getting a reversal of this? My guess would be your chances are pretty slim of getting a reversal, because this is just a killer ruling. So that's the position that O'Malley is in. Now, the reason that Chavez Ravine is almost empty in July 1958, when Judge Prager issues this ruling, is because of events that had occurred a number of years earlier. Now, the Chavez Ravine neighborhood, and it was a neighborhood for many years, was a traditional Mexican-American, a traditional Latino neighborhood that had existed in that area throughout much of the 20th century. When I say traditional, what I mean is a lot of the streets are unpaved, minimal city services, a very, very insular community, very religious community, and it's amazing that it's almost, as I say in the book, hiding in plain sight of the rest of Los Angeles, because it's only a mile from City Hall, but many Angelinos don't even know that it's there. They basically stay to themselves. Now, in the late 1940s, that area was chosen as the site of a public housing project. And through eminent domain, the city of Los Angeles basically bought out most of the residents of Chavez Ravine and cleared them out. It was not a pleasant situation. These people did not want to move. Many of them didn't really have legal representation, didn't really have the ability to fight City Hall, so to speak. So they took many of these eminent domain offers for their homes for the removals were, lowball offers. But most of them took those offers and left. There were, however, a number of families that refused to leave. Then, in 1953, the housing project was canceled. Now, the reason for that, there are complicated reasons. We don't necessarily have to go into them. They involve the Red Scare. These housing projects were being criticized in the early 50s as socialistic, even communistic, because they were public housing projects. And in the end, the public housing project was canceled. So then you have the situation where Chavez Ravine is almost empty of families. There's maybe 10 families left. But the housing project is also canceled, and the city, the city is basically sitting on this land. This is the land that they agreed in 1957 to make available to Walter O'Malley for the baseball team and for the baseball stadium. So when it's 1958 and this ruling goes against him, the ruling is that the people of Chavez Ravine, in part, the ruling is the people of Chavez Ravine need this land, but ironically there are very few people still left on that property. So that's the situation. It's almost empty. It's not cleared completely. There are families that are refusing to leave, and obviously that presages trouble in the future because, if the stadium project does go forward, they've got to go. But as of July 1958, there is no stadium because the judge has ruled against it.
And what surprises me is O'Malley's optimism, because he was a lawyer himself back in New York. And like you mentioned earlier, somehow, some way, we're going to get this done. Now, the ruling is, anyone else could just feel the breath coming out of him after being sucker punched. However, we got O'Malley's legal team here. They were optimistic that we're going to win on appeal. Now, they gave him the tools here. They said, look, Prager's rulings on land acquisition, street closings, the recreation area, and the public the purpose questions were vulnerable on appeal. In addition, there was a legal blunder by Silver.
And I think that was absolutely huge. And O'Malley's lawyers were O'Melveny and Myers, which is a firm that I still think exists in Los Angeles and was one of the finest law firms in the country. So if anyone could figure out a way to get this ruling reversed, it probably would be O'Melveny and Myers. They were helped by what seems to me, at least, to be an almost inexplicable blunder by the lawyers for Rubin and Kirschbaum. This Phil Silver character, and this guy truly was a character. Apparently, he ended up crossing the mob later on in his career and ended up, dead. But while he was alive and participating in this case, he made a mistake. And the mistake was there was some question about the valuation of the Chavez Ravine property, how much it was worth, compared to the property that the Dodgers traded to the city of Los Angeles in exchange for Chavez Ravine. That was the deal. And that property was located at what was known as Wrigley Field. Now, this is not Chicago's Wrigley Field. This is Los Angeles' Wrigley Field. It's a small baseball stadium in South Central Los Angeles that O'Malley owns because he traded in early 1957 with the Chicago Cubs. They traded minor league franchises. They traded the Fort Worth franchise to Chicago for the Los Angeles franchise. And this obviously was a move on O'Malley's part where he would have some property in Los Angeles if he decided to make the move. So he has this Wrigley Field. He owns Wrigley Field, and as part of the contract with Los Angeles, he trades the Wrigley Field property for the Chavez Ravine property. So there's a question because the Wrigley Field property, it's not near downtown Los Angeles. It's a rather small property. Well, how much is it worth? Is it worth about what the Chavez Ravine property is? Well, various assessors and accountants said yes. But Phil Silver is claiming that there's a gross disparity of value and it's not a fair trade. But what he does at the beginning of the trial is he takes that question out of it. The question of the relative valuations of these two properties, whether they're equal, he takes it out of it and he does it voluntarily. And it's been difficult for me to figure out why he did that, because it would seem to me that would be one of the things that he would be claiming. Now, the only thing I could think of is that Silver feels that he's going to win the case anyway, and getting involved in complicated questions of valuation not only will be complicated, but he doesn't have the resources for that. O'Melveny and Myers, O'Malley's lawyer, they do have the resources for that. So he makes that mistake, it seems, at the very beginning, and I think that comes back, to haunt him. He makes other legal mistakes, as well, but I think that's really the major one, because what happens then is when this case gets appealed up to the California Supreme Court, what they're able to do is say, well, we're taking the question of how much this land is valued at out of the equation here, out of our proceedings, and we're going to make our decision as to whether this contract is valid, assuming that there's equal value here, and that is a very, very big assumption because it really helps O'Malley. It makes it easier for him to say, well, this is an even-handed deal. This is not a one-handed, a one-sided deal. So when it finally gets up to the California Supreme Court, which actually, not finally, it goes up very quickly in late 1958, only a few months after the trial ruling, it's already up at the level of the California Supreme Court. When it hits the California Supreme Court, he actually has an advantage.
And Myers and O'Melveny, they took this decision head on, and I love the legal arguments they make. They said that the whole thing about the municipality or state agency could fulfill a public purpose. They said that the city council had determined, hey, it really didn't need Chavez Ravine. And
they didn't need that land. Yeah. And there's almost a tautological argument here which they get away with, because they first say, well, the land is not needed by the people of Chavez Ravine, however many people there, or the people of Los Angeles, but then they turn around and say, but they do need it as a recreation center. So, in other words, they don't need the land for private purposes, but they need the land for this recreation center. As part of the deal, the Dodgers promised to use some of the land at Chavez Ravine that they were going to get and create a recreation area or like a park-like area. And that was like a form of consideration. And that, I think, also swayed at least the appeals court judges. Now, not to get too deep into the legal weeds here, but the reason that the case went so quickly up to the California Supreme Court was that Phil Silver made another mistake. After he won on the trial level, he said, okay, I've won on the trial level. That means that this referendum that the Dodgers just won is invalid. So I'm going to bring an action to invalidate that referendum because the contract is illegal. And that procedural maneuver made it possible for the California Supreme Court to take the entire appeal up within a matter of maybe like 2 or 3 months, way, way, way more quickly than they would have under normal circumstances. Now if you lose a case in trial court and you start working your way up the appeals ladder in California, I cannot believe that you're going to get to the highest court in the state in 2 or 3 months. I just don't think that's going to happen. More like 2 or 3 years. Okay?
Yeah, it would be 3 years.
But what Silver did by trying to invalidate that referendum legally is I think what he ended up doing is skipping the intermediate appeals court, the equivalent of, the intermediate court of appeals on the state level in California, and going right from the trial court all the way to the Supreme Court. I mean, I see nothing in between in terms of my research. So he made a number of what we might say unforced errors here that made it possible for the Dodgers not just to get to the California Supreme Court quickly, but to put them in a very good position when they were there.
And and you and I can see the issues here, but what really, really, really took me by surprise? The lawyers argued. They became more expansive on their brief, not only in O'Malley's case, but they said, if the Supreme Court of California, affirms the trial court, it could potentially jeopardize every transaction that the sale of city land to a private party happens.
Right.
And this will have major, major impact on revenue to the city.
Right, and what they're doing is they're trying to issue sort of like a wake-up call to the California Supreme Court, saying this has all sorts of implications that you may not even see. This is way beyond a deal between a baseball team, and a city. Any time now the city of Los Angeles wants to sell or transfer city-owned property to a private entity, and these things actually happen. Under the trial court's ruling, virtually all of them would be illegal, which means that the city would, the city gets money for the transfer of property to private entities. This means that the city would be cut off from a major source of revenue. So O'Melveny and Myers are basically telling the California Supreme Court, be really careful here because the implications here go way beyond Dodger Stadium.
Now, the court rules, and what
yes.
And what people have to understand here, Thanksgiving came, the holidays came, and there's no word. And then on January 13th, 59, they spoke unanimously, the court. 7-0. Let's explain this.
Well, what they do is the California Supreme Court, through Phil Gibson, the Chief Justice, looks at this case from a completely different perspective, as does Judge Prager on the trial court level. It's almost as if they reverse the prism. What they say is, yes, a private entrepreneur, a private project, can have a public purpose if there are some benefits from that project going to the public. And though they don't go into it in much detail, they assume that a privately owned ballpark will generate tax revenues, will generate jobs, will generate even prestige, if you will. You may not be able to quantify it. And that is enough for the California Supreme Court to say, yes, there is some value that the public, that the people of Los Angeles are getting here. And as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, if they are getting some value, if the city of Los Angeles is getting some value out of this, it doesn't matter how much value Walter O'Malley is getting. Okay. In other words, if there's $5 of value, so to speak, going to the city of Los Angeles, it doesn't matter that Walter O'Malley is getting $100 of value, and they can do that largely because the relative valuations of the properties have been taken out of the case. So they say we're not going to rule on that, but they do say, well, the city of Los Angeles is getting something here, and as long as the city of Los Angeles is getting something, we're not concerned with how much money Walter O'Malley is going to make. That's the end of it. We're going to trust the City Council of Los Angeles to make the proper calculations here. And if they thought that this would be a beneficial deal for the City of Los Angeles, we're not going to overrule them. So what the California Supreme Court is ruling, in effect, is that, yes, a private stadium, a private business, can serve a public purpose under certain circumstances, and these circumstances merit that. So O'Malley gets a sweeping reversal and a sweeping victory, and I would argue that of all the travails he went through, the most dangerous one, for him, the Proposition B, the negotiations to move the team in the first place. There were all sorts of construction delays on the stadium once he started to build it. There was the question of the people who were remaining on the Chavez Ravine land who refused to leave. Of all of those things, this taxpayer lawsuit and this legal case was the most dangerous for him because it could have completely derailed this project. What happens if the Supreme Court of California affirms this? He probably takes this to the Supreme Court of the United States, and he probably loses there, and he has no stadium contract. And it's not something that you can vote on or lobby for or discuss in the media. It's over. So I think this was the big moment in January 1959 when the Supreme Court of California gave him the go-ahead. If they had ruled against him, God knows what would have happened.
And, I'm going to just say 2 points and end the show because I know we're running on time. But one of the things, you make a great a great analogy here. It was, it's pretty much the age of Jackson and Jefferson. You got the Democrat Republicans versus the Federalists. The whole push and pull for our very Constitution and early politics in America. This is what went on in the California Supreme Court, and, basically the Federalists won, you wrote in your book. Now, let me just explain it for a second.
Yeah.
The two different ideologies that came out in the late 1700s, early 1800s was more of a centralized government versus a very smaller kind of government, a more agricultural kind of,
less activist government.
Right.
Less activist federal government, power to the states and localities, low tax, what I would say low tax, low services, basically. And that's the Jeffersonian model in the 1700s. We view Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, he's a great liberal. Well, in many ways, in the late 1700s, his vision for America was very conservative because it did not involve a powerful federal government picking winners and losers, so to speak, which was to some extent what Hamilton on the other side was envisioning. So Hamilton's view here is that the government can aid businesses through government, we call this neoliberalism today, could aid businesses which it feels will work in the public interest. And in this instance, Dodger Stadium would be one of those businesses. While the Jeffersonians and the Jacksonians would say no special favoritism to any business, you got to stand and fall on your own, and that would be the philosophy of the opponents of the Dodger deal here. So what I argue is that they're playing out an argument between the Hamiltonians and the Jeffersonians and the Jacksonians as well, a 18th and 19th century argument in a 20th century modern setting.
If they would have gone to the Supreme Court, I would have told you right now, by 1960, 61, it would have gone on to the Supreme Court.
Right.
I disagree with you. I think the Warren Court, already I know there would be probably four of them who would vote in favor of O'Malley. That would be Warren, Brennan, Black, and Douglas. I think they would vote in favor of this. The whole districting. Potter Stewart, Justice Marshall Harlan, and Frankfurter would probably disagree on it.
Right. But you don't want to go there, so to speak, because that's years and years. And had the California Supreme Court ruled against them, I think it really would have halted the progress on the on the stadium. I think the reason that O'Malley went forward after July '58, after that adverse trial court ruling, was that O'Malley and Myers lawyers told him that he had a shot of reversing this, and that he should just sort of proceed with his plans for the stadium. But if they lost on the California Supreme Court level, let's say in January '59, as you say, you're talking 1960, 1961 before it even gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I think he just has to halt the preparations for the Dodger Stadium. That means he's stuck in the L.A. Coliseum where he really does not want to be.
And that's where we're going to pick up next time. And hold the line, Jerry. I'll be right with you. Folks, this is a great book. You got two lawyers over here arguing and debating and seeing all the kinds of possibilities. Go to Amazon. Go to the University of Nebraska Press. Where else could we find this?
Actually, it's Princeton University Press.
It's Princeton. So go to Princeton. Get the book. It's real worth your time to get it. As always, I'm Ian Kahanowitz. Thanks to Jerry for being on the show today. And in the immortal words of Edward R. Murrow, good night, folks. Good luck. We'll see you next time.